Hi everybody, this is Sarah Maddox coming at you with an art break for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Like I said, my name is Sarah. I work at the Hunter in the development team. As you can tell, I'm a little bit nervous. Yesterday was my first time using Facebook Live and I accidentally cut myself off mid-sentence by hitting the wrong button. So hopefully we'll go a little bit more smoothly today. Today I'm going to be sharing with you kind of how to get started with an embroidery project. And as part of that, as part of preparing for that, I've been thinking about why I love embroidery so much, why I love textiles and kind of textile related artwork so much. I kind of think there are sort of two aspects to that I want to share with you, reasons why I think textiles are so compelling. In one hand, you've got sort of formal elements of textiles, things like, it's really a celebration of color and pattern, texture, all of those kinds of things. They can be decorative or functional. But there's another much more complicated, I think, piece of textiles. And I think that because textiles are a part of humans' everyday lives, we adorn our bodies in textiles, we fill our homes with textiles. As I look around my house right now, there are textiles on me, there are textiles on the floor, on the windows, on the furniture. There's specialized textiles for all kinds of different things. Hi folks, I see that there's some people joining in. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about getting started with an embroidery project. And I'm also talking a little bit about why I think textiles are so compelling. I was saying that I think there are some formal elements to textiles that are really compelling to me, like a celebration of shape, color, pattern, texture, but there are also some more social and maybe even some controversial aspects of textile work, and why I think that's kind of connected to the work that we see a lot of women artists in our collection and male artists in our collection utilizing textiles in their artwork, and I think it's kind of an inherently political thing to do. Maybe political is not necessarily the right word for it, but I think because textiles are a part of our everyday lives, they really intersect and interact with all of the systems that we live within. That includes all kinds of things. Includes aspects that have to do with gender identity. It has aspects to do with race and nationality and class, all kinds of things. So any artist that chooses to work with textiles, I think is probably doing so on purpose, and some really interesting things can happen when an artist chooses to do that. So I want to start with our collection connection today. An artist named Miriam Shapiro will be looking at a piece of work called In Her Own Image. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge something about Miriam Shapiro's work and a little bit about her life. She passed away in 2015, but she was very active as a painter in the late 20th century, from the 70s on, and she was an activist who was really interested in making sure that women became represented in art spaces, art world spaces that had been excluding women. And she was very successful in a lot of her activism in that way, and we have a piece of hers in our collection. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the kind of movement that she was a part of was not inclusive. And there are some aspects to her work that are a little bit uncomfortable for me. I'm really compelled by her work, but there are also some things about this piece that are a little bit sticky and icky, and I think I love that about how we can interact with that sort of thing through art. I think that when the world is complicated, art can really be a balm, but it can also serve to get us out of our comfort zone and make us think about things a little bit differently. So I want to show you something. Well, let me flip my camera around. That's what I did wrong yesterday, and I accidentally cut myself off, but I've done it successfully here. So this is Miriam Shapiro's work from our collection. It was done in the early 80s, and she worked quite a lot with different kinds of materials. This particular work is acrylic and fabric on canvas. Miriam Shapiro referred to a lot of her series as femages, which is sort of an idea of a collage made up of items and materials that sort of represented her idea of femininity and feminine identity. And in this particular piece, I think that, I'm not an expert on her work, but when I look at this, there are a few things that I see, and I think there are a lot of references to the body and its symmetry and its scale. It's about 60 inches tall, and I think if you look at it, you can also see a lot of, I see a kimono. And Miriam Shapiro was a white artist. So when I look at that, I really think of that as being kind of appropriative. She's taking something from a culture that is not her own, and she is making art about it. And that is something that I think is really complicated and kind of sticky. It really has a lot to do with systems of power and things like that. So that's just something kind of food for thought. But today I do want to talk about some of the formal elements of this piece that I think can really help us as we get started on our embroidery project. There are some, like I said, some formal elements. There isn't any exact embroidery in this piece specifically, but there are elements of design that I think are really commonly found in embroidered works, and I think can really help us think about ways we can use embroidery and incorporate it into things that we're making. So the first thing that I want to kind of talk about is different kinds of patterns. You'll see some, let's see if I can hold this steady. This area here and into here, in here, there are all these different sections of this work made up with different surface patterns, and I think that's something that we can really take into account when we're thinking about how we want to approach an embroidery project. Like I said, I think that this really references garments, and garments are typically, not always, but typically sort of symmetrical in a lot of ways, and there are typically symmetrical elements to a lot of the clothing that we wear. This isn't perfectly symmetrical. You can see in some of these floral motifs here that they're not quite the same one side on the other, and that's an interesting kind of dynamic element to the work. You can also think about color story. I see a lot of blues and greens, pinks and things like that, those kinds of colors, some yellows, warm and cool. Some of them are sort of analogous. You've got sort of pink and yellow in together, and you've got blue and green together, and that kind of creates some harmony. You can think about that when you're kind of designing your own project. And we've also got some like really interesting like edging details. If you think of this as like the edge of a piece of fabric, think about some of the textiles in your own home. There are all kinds of ways that embroidery can be used to embellish something like an existing garment, something like that. You can do something along the edge. You could embroider a pattern. This was probably done by printing of some kind, but you could do an all-over pattern on a garment or a piece of fabric, anything like that. So those are just some things to kind of keep in mind. Like I said, some of the more formal elements, things having to do with the form of the piece that I think are, interesting to keep in mind as you're planning a new project. So if you will forgive me for a moment, I am going to try to get my little setup going here to show you some of the stitches and some of the kind of example pieces that I have here. If you get seasick easily, close your eyes for a second, because I have to affix my camera here to a really bizarre little situation. So I'm going to flip the camera, and hopefully this is not going to be too loud or jarring for you. Oh, that went a little better than I expected. I hope you can see. All right, made so much fun of my partner Steven when he bought this selfie stick so that we could play card games with his parents on FaceTime. I made so much fun of him, and now look at me. I'm using it for this. So I do want to just show you a few things. Like I said, one of the things that I love so much about embroidery is this exploration of color and texture and really sculptural elements. And when you think about embroidery, I know that this was true of me before I started working on embroidery projects myself. I really thought of embroidery as being kind of strict, and that there wasn't a whole lot of room for creative expression in it. I couldn't possibly have been more wrong. You really can make very expressive marks and build really sculptural elements just using thread on fabric. And that's kind of my approach in general. That's why I'm not sharing a pattern with you or anything like that. I'm just going to show you kind of some basic stitches that I like to use in my work. And I think those will help you build a vocabulary so that you can do with your embroidery whatever it is that you want to do. And that can be a geometric pattern. It can be kind of illustrative. This is sort of a floral motif that I have going. Or it can just be like, this is a piece that I made. This is one of my favorite things that I've made in a favorite technique. It looks kind of strange. It's just a little orb. But it's just pure texture. It's just kind of a pom-pom that I made through one of the techniques that I'm going to show you. So this looks a little bit crazy right now because we're going to do something with this here in a second. But there are sort of 5 stitches that I want to show you today. This is called a chain stitch, or I learned it. I'm sure that there are many different names for some of these stitches. I learned that this is called a chain stitch. This is called a French knot. This is backstitch. I don't really know what you would call this. I would just call this sort of a straight stitch. You can see it's a little bit textured there. And this is something called turkey work. That is one of my favorite things in the whole world. And that's how I made this. And I've got a fruit fly. Go away, little buddy. And this is sort of one of those that's in progress as well. And what I love about this is it really is just a really sort of sensory experience, all of these different colors sort of melding together, and you can kind of cut these loops. Basically what you're doing is you're just creating a loop. It's really the same kind of technique, and I think this is actually why it's called turkey work, is that it's the same kind of technique that's used in certain kinds of, for instance, like Turkish rug making. So this is a tiny, tiny little round rug. But I love that I can just kind of hang it on this little loop that I created on accident while I was stitching it, and I just hang it on the wall, and it sort of glows when the light hits it. I use these neon and metallic threads in here, and I just can't stop petting it. I love it. So I want to show you a few different stitches, like I said, but first I'll talk about the project that I've started. I showed you all this yesterday if you joined me for the little materials introduction yesterday. As of yesterday afternoon, I hadn't done any stitching on this at all. This is a not very cute face mask that I decided, oh, my dog has decided to join me. Sorry, folks, if y'all can hear my dog bounding around. I decided I wanted this to be a little bit cuter. Hopefully, after a while, I'll see some of you all at the museum, and I'll be wearing a, joyful, expressive mask, and I hope that some of you all will be doing the same. But this is turkey work right here. This is straight stitch. These here are French knots, and these are straight stitch as well. So that's what I kind of mean when I say just having a few stitches that you feel comfortable playing with, you can get a lot of dimensionality and texture, and if you add playing with color on top of that, you can do so much, and you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be a perfectionist. I'm certainly not. So that's kind of my approach. It is really not, it's not too organized. Like I said, really to me, embroidery is just about mark making and being expressive. So I'm going to illustrate some of these to you, but first thing I'm going to do, because I just absolutely, well, I'll hold off. Let's start with a couple of these. This chain stitch, is really good for, in this case, you can see that you can use it to fill space. So if you want to create a shape and then fill it in with a solid color, you can do that. I'll show you an example from an old project. This is kind of my style of a sampler project. I started this when I first got into embroidery. And this whole area here was put together with a chain stitch. So you can make just a line. It's really great for working with script. This is I guess I have to tell this story now. This is a denim jacket of mine, and Ciro sed Serio is the Latin motto of a Scottish clan that my paternal great-grandmother descended from. It means late but in earnest, and when I learned that, I thought it was the funniest thing in the world, and sort of saw myself in that, so I stitched it on my denim jacket. But this is a chain stitch. It's a really nice textural but crisp way of creating line work. So let's dive into that first. So I'm gonna do this in a color coordinated manner. So this is the stitch right here that we're gonna work on. I'm gonna come over here and do a few example lines. And sorry, it's got a little bit wobbly. Sorry, I hope I'm not making anybody seasick. I'm gonna try to show you how I thread this needle. It's a little tricky and I can't see too great. I'm just gonna have to do that off camera, I think. All right, now my needle is threaded, and I just loop my thread through one time and leave a little tail hanging. I don't do what I would do with sewing thread, which is double it up all the way and then tie a knot at the end. Now I am gonna tie just a really simple little overhand knot here, just like that, so that to secure the thread on the other side here. And I'm gonna get started. So I've kind of drawn a little line here. I hope you can see. This is a tricky setup. All right, I've pulled my thread all the way through, and I'm going to create a little loop. I'm gonna hold it down with my thumb, and I'm going to insert the needle back right next to where it came from. I'm gonna make sure that I'm not putting my needle through. See, on the back side, you can see how it's kind of coming out just the same place that the needle went through on the underside. I want to hold my thumb here because I don't want to pull the thread all the way through. I want to catch it on my thumb like that. And then I want to, however long I want my stitch to be, I'm going to come up right next to that. I've got a question here. What do I draw on the fabric with? Great question. This is a white gel pen, and it's really great for drawing on dark fabrics. On this kind of felt, it can kind of tend to rub away, but you can just kind of sketch back over it, just like that. All right, so here I am in my first loop. I'm gonna pull up right next to that and pull it taut. And that's my first link in the chain. I'm gonna set my thumb back down. I'm gonna go in between this little loop here, poke my needle back down through the same way I came up, pull my loop, come back up, catch the loop, and that's my second link in the chain. Do it one or two more times because I know I'm a chatty lady and this is taking such a long time. It's a really slow kind of activity, and my talking so much, it really isn't helping. So you see that three little chain links there. And then if that were the end of my line, I could just poke the needle back down and just secure that loop right there at the end. And then tie it off on the back. Now, the backs of my projects are notoriously messy, but I do like to just take it all the way down like that, pull it taut, and then these shears are really great for clipping the thread so that you don't have too many things tangled up on the back. Now the next one that I want to try is this other sort of linear stitch here. It's called Backstitch. Let's try that one. That one should be really quick. and then we'll get into the really fun stuff. So I don't know how everyone else threads a needle. Mine involves spit, to be honest with you. Oop. Oh, I hope I'm making everybody seasick. Oh, I'm so nervous I can barely thread a needle. Ha ha ha. All right, let's do one more kind of linear stitch. So there's my knot for the back of this. Okay, so here I am on this line, and I'm not going to complete the line. It's taken too long. Oops, I pulled my needle off the thread. It happens way more often when you're on Facebook Live than in real life. All right, I'm back on. And that is kind of the tricky thing about keeping the fabric or the thread, it's sort of tricky to keep it on there. But if you were to try to pull a doubled length of this through, it might be too thick to do that. So I'm just going to make one straight little stitch here. Simple stitch. Pull it through. And then sort of similarly to how we did with the chain stitch, I'm going to go out the length of the next stitch and pull up there. And then I'm going to go backwards and insert the thread back through where the last stitch ended. Do the same thing one more time. What I like about this is that it allows you to create sort of an uninterrupted line without any gaps in between, and it's nice and stable. You're not at risk of kind of pulling your thread through a weak spot in the fabric. Now this is pretty messy, sorry guys, but you get the gist, and it creates like a nice line on the bottom too. So that's another stitch. Now I'm gonna go ahead and we'll start with this kind of straight stitch. It's really similar to Backstitch, but it's better suited for filling in spaces, like larger areas. Just like that red dot we've got there, we're gonna do a small one. And then here in a moment, I'll kind of point out to you how I've used each of these stitches in my own projects, just to make sure that it's clear how each one works. So I'm going to just fill in this little dot here. And you can start from anywhere. I'm just going to start from the middle. Now, here is what I like to do. I have a couple of options. I have a couple of ways that I can do this, and some of them are more efficient than others. But I'm going to poke my needle in right next to where that last stitch ended, as opposed to looping back through on the back. And then I'm going to do the same thing. So this stitch ended right here. I'm going to come up right next to it to the left. And then do one more. Well, kind of miscalculated that one. When you look on the back, you're not going to see the same filled in shape on the back. You'll just see the little tiny stitches in between where you placed all of those. So that's a pretty efficient way of not wasting. Let's look at that for this one. You can see that I made the mistake once of going all the way back through to meet the stitch on the other side. But if you do it this more efficient way, you have all these tiny little stitches on the back and you're not wasting a ton of thread, which you might be surprised how quickly this thread goes when you're filling in large spaces. I would say this here probably used an entire skein of embroidery floss. Let's get on to the two most fun stitches, French knots, and like I said, the turkey work. I'm going to clip my thread here. Having sharp scissors really makes a difference when you're threading your needle. So this is going to be for my French knot. And that's what this little mass here is made up of. And I love these, you know, I do a lot of stitching of sort of like floral motifs. These are really great for like the centers of flowers and things like that. Now, I kind of need to set this down to do this. Okay, so I've got my thread sticking up. Here's my needle. My needle is right here. I'm holding the thread taut. I'm going to push my needle like this, and I'm going to loop the thread around 3 times. Let's see if you can see that more up close. I'm just looping the thread around. I'm not tying a knot. I'm just looping it around the needle, and I'm going to take the needle and insert it back into the fabric, and I'm going to struggle really hard to pull it through. There we go. Ooh, I'm caught on my turkey work. If I just keep on pulling, it creates a really cute little knot. Let me try that one more time. I am all kinds of tangled up in my other thread. This is poor thread hygiene. You definitely want to trim all these things off the back when you're still working on a project. Let's do one more of those. Pull up, pull my thread taut, wrap my needle a few times, and pull it on through. And you can wrap your needle a few more times, and I've kind of done that a few times in here. It kind of creates a little bit more dimension and texture if you do that. All right, let's move on to my absolute favorite technique that I would love to show you today. I'm going to go ahead and trim all of these so I don't make a mess. So let's talk about this giant wad of thread right here. This doesn't look like much right now, but what's super fun about this is that that is a way that you can create texture. This is the result of the same kind of technique. See how velvety and kind of plush it is? I've done that a lot on here. Do I go back through the same hole or just next to it? It doesn't really matter. It depends on just how precise you want to be. So this is trimmed turkey work. And what it is here, what we're looking at, is just loops. So each of these, remember how we created a loop when we were making our chain stitch, and then we pulled the next thread through it and through that and through that? This is a really similar technique, but each loop we're just going to secure with a tiny stitch. So let me go ahead and thread this up, and I will show you. I mean, it takes a good bit of time to fill in a space with this technique, but we're just going to do a couple of example stitches. Now this one, I'm actually going to go in from the top. I'm not going to go from behind the fabric, and I'm also not going to tie a knot. So I need to be careful to watch where my thread is as I pull it through. I don't want to pull it all the way through. Here it is. So now I've got one little kind of tail sticking up. What I want to do is go in to the base of that stitch, come back up from the other side, and make a teeny tiny stitch. Now you're not really going to be able to see that stitch once all of this is here, but what you're doing is you're securing it. Now I can't pull that thread out. I'm going to go in right next to that over to the right, pull my thread back up, and now this is the part that's similar to that chain stitch. I'm going to create a loop, hold my thread down to create that loop, and when I stop it, I catch it with my thumb there, I'm going to make that tiny stitch. And it doesn't have to be right next to it, but pretty close. That is going to secure my loop. And you just keep repeating that process until you have this crazy little troll doll hair forest of loops. And this is the most fun part of all. You get to trim it. You get to give it a haircut. And these shears are really great for that. Now this is really, really messy, and that's probably one reason why I love it so much. And an unlikely tool for embroidery, I think, is a, what do you call this? Like a lint roller, because I make such a mess when I'm trimming stuff like this. But you get to just trim it, trim it, trim it, and what you're doing is you're cutting those loops so that it becomes a pile, kind of like on a carpet. And you just keep trimming and trimming and trimming. Thanks, Natalie. I hope you can see what I'm doing. So I made these loops quite tall. I probably, you know, for this one, this is an example of turkey work as well. And it's variegated here because I use 2 different kinds of thread. That's something that I like to do in a lot of my projects, just to kind of give some extra dimension to the image that I'm creating. But I'm just going to keep trimming away. And you can kind of clean up as you go. But you can start to kind of see this effect that you can get. It kind of looks like a little firework that went off. And kind of comb it around. And you can make it as deep or as kind of shallow of a pile as you like, for whatever effect it is that you're going for. And then the bonus is that these kind of look like paintings when you're done. Thank you so much. I'm gonna flip the camera around here. I hope you all have enjoyed this. I know it's been a little fly by the seat of our pants, but that's sort of my approach to doing this kind of work. I hope y'all have enjoyed. If y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments and stuff like that. So thank you all so very much for joining me. Before I go, I want to wish a very happy birthday to Allie Hoagland. Happy birthday, Allie. You're a wonderful person. You're a delight. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you all so much for spending some time with me. And I hope that I'll see you back here for another art break. Thanks so much.